Oh, that's right. You know what time it is. It's time for the Sugar Creek Forge Build-Along 2012. I got my hand on the fire, putting the fire to the steel. Come on, Sugar Creek Forge, won't you tell me what's the deal? Right.
Hey everybody, give a special welcome to all our viewers and especially to the Sugar Creek Forge Knife Build Along 2012 team members. I see a lot of great hard work going on out there, and it's a lot of fun to see all of you building knives, doing this together. We got a special treat tonight. I'm uploading this video. We have a special guest presenter. Our very own is a sponsor and just been a big help, our very own Mr. Kyley Harris, all the way from New Zealand, and so I'm just so tickled. He's going to show us some techniques for sanding, and so I've seen a lot of great videos. So tickled with how everyone's doing, and keep working and making those knives. I'm going to show a little bit here from Kyley, try to organize that a little bit, and a little bit from my work on the knife. I'm actually on the road right now. I'm training some regional sales teams, and I'm having a good time, but I'm tired. I tried to record a little video last night, and I looked at myself, and it looked like I'd been smoking dope or something. I mean, I was so tired, and so anyway, hopefully I don't look quite like that tonight. Without further ado, let's jump in. Here's Kyley.
Hey guys, it's Kyley here from CKC Knives. Yesterday I did a quick video on this little board here showing a few tips on how you can do some of the finishing work on your knife, convexing it by hand without any belt grinders and things. And Tim from Sugar Creek Forge suggested maybe if I could do another video that he could integrate some parts into his video so that you don't miss any of the tips that I've been doing, as he was going to do one very similar. What I'm going to show is doing some of the basic things on how to work the filing of this into a convex edge nice and easily with a few basic tools. Now, I've actually got today, this is a heat treated 4mm 01 blade. It's about 61 RC, so it's quite hard. So I'm not going to be filing it all the way down. I'm just going to be demonstrating a few things with it. And you can see down there that it's already had a pre-bevel done, which is flat and heat treated. Now, rather than using a metal file, what I'm going to be using is my leather strop with a nice wooden backing. It's quite firm, it's got a little bit of flex in it. And instead of using the metal file, I like to use sandpapers because I can work the action a bit better. It works in a similar way to a belt grinder, and I can get a cleaner finish by using lots of different grades and grits of sandpaper. Now what I've done here is just buy a normal 2x72 belt off my grinder, and I've chopped a section off, and this is actually already quite worn out, but it'll be sufficient for the test just to show how it works. And for the normal filing, whether it's flat or anything, what I do is basically just lay it over the flat hard side of the wood like this and wrap it over, and you could make something to pin it or anything like that, but I just hold it there with my hands like that, and that's going to make an effective file for sanding, and it's very good because you can go back and forwards. Now the leather backing is very, very good when you're sanding with leather or some other soft backing, and that's where I'm going to show you this. This is actually a silicone baking mat, and it's firm but it's got a little bit of give. If you have something like that behind your sandpaper, then it's very good for shaping and smoothing out and contouring. You're going to get a smoother texture in the pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a small amount of filing on here to show how that works, and you can get a feel for it. And I'll position the camera so you can kind of see what I'm doing a bit better, and then I'll zoom it in a bit. And as you can see from this extremely worn out ratty table that's half rotten and falling apart just under the weight of the clamp, I'm not using any advanced tools here. just a clamp and a bit of wood and some sandpaper. So let's give it a go. So basically going to start off, this is a 40 grit paper that's worn out, and whether it's before or after heat treat, you can just use this softly like a file and work that bevel. Now where the leather is good is for doing the softer backing. Now I'm going to just do a bit of a close-up so you can see it a little bit better. Maybe drop the angle too. Now obviously this old sandpaper isn't going to cut that fast, and this is very heat treated, so it's not that easy. But using the hard surface is a good way to get the metal off quickly. And this is a very thick edge on here. Normally, because I use a belt grinder, you'd be working with a bit thinner steel. And of course, if you use a wider piece of wood, you'll get more cutting action out of it. Now if I zoom right up, what you'll be able to see is the scratch pattern coming out of that 40 grit. Now when you're doing the convexing, what you want to do is switch over to the leather side, and that leather has got just enough give to help you slightly round that off. And if you use a bit of wet and dry or something on there, WD-40 or anything like that, it's going to help the cutting action with the sandpaper. I just don't happen to have any of that on me right now. But let's switch over to the leather side and give it a bit of a scraping. So this time, put the leather backing on there, flip this over, and what you hear is it's a much quieter sound with the leather. I'll just focus on one area. Now if I come over, hopefully you can see that where the leather is being used, it's starting to soften up and make a nice contoured convex. Now what I'm going to do here is get a finer belt. Okay, so what I've got here, this is a 60 grit belt, and what I'm just going to do, it's an older belt I've been using. And you don't have to use anything this long, you can use just normal sandpaper from the shop with a smaller piece of wood. It doesn't have to be a big belt like this. There goes the form living. So again, it's slightly worn out. We're going to use the leather side, get that nice and firm so you've got a good grip on it. And what you're effectively creating is a semi-slack belt. And you apply a little bit of downward pressure. And hold the table steady. And you can see everything sanding off there quite nicely. Alright. Now what's important that I'd like to show you is from using that leather, the leather backing that we have here with the sandpaper, there's just enough give and softness in there to help contour the flat into a convex bevel. And it might be hard to see on the camera, but I can feel it's nicely rounding now from the sanding. And all we've done is gone from the original flat bevel, and it's going up a little bit higher and coming down to the edge and softening up. Now, as I said, the good thing about this is you can use any sandpaper you've got, up to 1,000 grits, whatever. And one other thing I buy, and I got it very, very cheap, actually I got it almost for free, is a big long reel of Scotch-Brite designed to go on a belt grinder. This is a fine Scotch-Brite, and although that's a 60 grit finish that I'm on there now, I can use this with the hard backing because this is already soft. And this is a very good finishing tool product for smoothing things out. Just that little bit there. Okay, so even that very small amount of effort with the Scotch-Brite, you can see I was wearing it out because it was digging into the edge. If you go one direction, it won't rip up on here and scratch it, but it's actually getting a very, very smooth feeling now. That's slippery smooth to the touch, even though there's still scratch patterns in there. The Scotch-Brite's very good at doing that. And the advantage to this over using a smaller pad or a hand pad is that you can get long, even strokes like the file or like a belt grinder. And hopefully these tips will help you finish the knives, and for convex knives especially, the leather backing and the long stroke makes quick work of it. Alright, so even with a few basic steps and small processes, I'm starting to get a very nice smooth satin finish on there with the foundational convex.
Thanks, Kyley. I'm going to show a couple pictures of my process for this in the knife and give you a couple of reminders. The first one's a safety tip. I see a lot of people who have their knife sticking out of a vise with the point. It's not backed by anything. And first of all, that's not good for filing. It's going to make it difficult, and also it's very dangerous. If you get against that file, I one time was hand sanding a knife and had the tip sticking out. I dropped the sandpaper and bent down to pick it up, and when I stood up, I forgot that the knife was sticking out, and it got me in the back pretty good. So remember, you're doing this at your own risk, and we need to follow safety procedures, safety glasses, gloves, whatever you need, and just be very, very careful. Don't have your knife sticking out of a vise and go off and leave it, because you could hurt yourself, or somebody else could walk through, not see it, and get right against the point. And especially when we heat treat them and you start, getting them sharp, it's just very dangerous. So please remember that. Okay, so a couple shots of what I have been working on so far by hand. Okay, so now in my final operation of filing, I'm just going to do some very smooth draw filing to get all the scratches going in one direction. And I'm going to be concentrating especially on tapering the knife a little bit. It's going to taper on the end, and also on these ricassos, getting them nice and clean and that plunge line above the choil. So I'm just using my thumb as a little bit of a guide, just really smoothly working on these. I'm not in a hurry, just working on getting my plunge lines nice and square, and then I'll do some more draw filing from there. So now all that's left really is to make sure that I have a little bit of distal taper, that my point is a little bit tapered. This steel is so thin that we don't want to taper it a lot. It's 3/32, and it only needs to taper a little bit at the point to give it a little bit of a delicate look. So for our sanding operation, I'm going to be using 150 grit emery paper, and it's actually kind of cloth backed. It's pretty strong. Now we're going to make a little bit of sanding tool, and this is going to be very similar to Kyley's strop. I have a piece of mesquite and some of this suede, and I'm just going to glue suede on one side of this stick. It's going to look like this. I just draw around it, make my marks, cut it out, and then I'll stick it onto one side of this stick with some spray adhesive. Now when I switch to emery cloth, I am just simply going to do the same thing. I'm going to grind very carefully, or sand very carefully, using this little bracket as a guide to clean up my plunge line area of the grind. And I'm going horizontal to the blade. When I switch grits, I'll go parallel with the blade, and that way I can make sure that I see that all of the previous scratches are sanded out of my blade. I'm just doing it nice and smooth and easy. And I think it's pretty cool that I'm using this little sword peasant knife that I got from a drawing that Kyley had. Now you can see I'm working pretty aggressively sanding on this blade. You can go back and forth as Kyley said. And I'm just using controlled motions back and forth, and I'm getting out any of the marks that were left by the file. And here's a close-up of what those scratch marks look like in the blade. Now I switch to a 220, and I'm just going back and forth perpendicular to the blade, and I'm getting out all of the scratches that I put in with the 150, and I can see because they're going in a different direction when I've got them completely out. Again, I'm just going back and forth pretty easy, and it's amazing how this sandpaper cuts. You can tell from a lot of the filings that are laying beside the knife. And I'm going to continue sanding carefully like this on both sides and not taking it any higher than 220. I'm doing that simply because I had 220 sandpaper. We don't want to go further before heat treat. So this is what it looks like at this stage. I've sanded it to 220 grit, and this is about ready for heat treat. I'm not going to go any further or do any final polishing until after heat treat when the knife is hardened. I like Kyley's tip on Scotch-Brite, and I'm going to do that after it's heat treated.
Oh, that's right. You know what time it is. It's time for the Sugar Creek Forge Build-Along 2012. I got my hand on the fire, putting the fire to the steel. Come on, Sugar Creek Forge, won't you tell me what's the deal? Right. Get some, we're gonna have some fun. Build myself a blade, you know it's gonna